All right, so get this. Elon Musk has been out there making some pretty wild claims about USAA, the U.S. Agency for International Development.
Fancy. Uh-huh.
He's suggesting they're funding bioweapon research, even tying it to COVID-19.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so we're going to dive deep into this today
Okay.
with you using some amazing reporting from investigative journalist Emily Kopp at the Daily Caller News Foundation.
It's definitely attention-grabbing.
Yeah.
These accusations are serious, and they really make you think about the line between scientific research for, let's say, good, and its potential for misuse. That's what we call dual-use research.
Dual-use research. Okay, so that sounds like a tightrope walk. Can you give me an example of that?
Imagine research that aims to, say, decode how a virus spreads so we can create better treatments. That same knowledge could hypothetically be used to make that virus more dangerous. It's a tricky ethical situation, no doubt.
So how does USAI fit into this? Musk even mentioned COVID-19 specifically. Did Kopp's reporting touch on that connection?
It did. USAI had a program called Predict. Yeah, and their goal was to find viruses in animals that could potentially jump to humans and will cause pandemics. Imagine them as like virus hunters collecting samples across the globe.
Virus hunters, I like that.
Yeah.
And this is where things get a little close to home, right? Kopp mentioned USAID was working with EcoHealth Alliance, which had connections to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
That's right. USAID through EcoHealth Alliance was collaborating with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. As Previx wrapped up, Kopp discovered something pretty unsettling. Thousands of virus samples were left in Wuhan.
Thousands.
Yeah, the lack of transparency around those samples definitely raises questions, especially with all the discussions surrounding the origins of COVID-19.
Whoa, okay, that's a bit unnerving.
Yeah.
But hold on, how do we separate legitimate research from what might be considered bioweapons? Is there like a clear distinction?
It's a tough one. Kopp's reporting highlighted that it often boils down to intent.
Intent.
Yeah, there's no hard and fast technical definition separating the two under international law.
So even research focused on preventing pandemics could be misinterpreted as having, let's say, less noble goals.
Absolutely. And here's another point Kopp made that I think is really important. When questions are raised about the U.S.'s involvement in this kind of research, it often gets labeled as conspiracy theorizing.
Oh, really?
But, if we had the same concerns about another country's research, those concerns would be taken seriously. It creates a strange double standard.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay, let's follow the money for a second. Why was USAID funding this research instead of, say, the National Institutes of Health or NIH? They're known for medical research, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? It's a bit of a head-scratcher. USAID is mainly associated with humanitarian efforts. Funding this kind of scientific work from them is unusual. It's possible USAID provided a less scrutinized path for this research, especially considering that at the time, the NIH had a moratorium on certain types of gain-of-function research.
Hold on, gain-of-function research. Now, I'm not a virologist, so can you break that down for me? And for our listener, of course.
Of course, gain-of-function research essentially involves tweaking viruses to make them spread more easily or be more deadly. It's a controversial area.
Okay.
On one hand, it could help us understand and prepare for potential pandemics. On the other hand, there's the risk of accidentally creating a more dangerous pathogen.
And Kopp's reporting is very clear. USAID's funding did support gain-of-function research on brand-new coronaviruses collected directly from the wild. I have to admit, this is starting to feel like a scientific thriller.
Right.
Yeah.
What's even more interesting is Kopp's observation that even the researchers involved sometimes weren't clear on the line between USAID and NIH-funded work.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's a big red flag when it comes to oversight and accountability.
Wow. We've definitely uncovered a lot of information.
Yeah.
But it feels like there are still more questions than answers. What do you think?
I agree, and that's precisely what makes this whole thing so compelling. We're not just dealing with scientific facts. We're wading into the ethical, political, and even geopolitical implications of this research.
You hit the nail on the head. This issue has potentially huge consequences.
Right.
We're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
There's still so much to unravel as we dig deeper into this.
This really drives home the need for transparency in scientific research, especially when, we're dealing with potentially risky areas like gain-of-function research. The stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's easy to get lost in all the scientific details. But one thing that really stood with me from Kopp's reporting was the EcoHealth Alliance president, Peter Daszak, requesting a rather large sum of money from USAID for international business class flights.
Yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows. It plays into a broader concern about how taxpayer dollars are being used and whether there's enough accountability.
Yeah, it's almost like we're peeling back layers of an onion here.
Right.
And with every layer, we find something even more intriguing and potentially concerning.
Exactly. And what makes Kopp's reporting so valuable is that she connects these seemingly unrelated details, pushing us to ask tougher questions.
Like, why was USAID involved in funding this type of research at all? Their mission is humanitarian aid, not diving deep into virology.
Right, and Kopp doesn't shy away from highlighting that contradiction. She even questions the entire premise of this kind of research, suggesting that predicting pandemics by studying how viruses evolved in a lab might be more science fiction than a practical solution.
It makes you wonder if there were other motivations in play beyond the stated goal of pandemic preparedness.
That's the question that lingers, isn't it? And Kopp's reporting shines a light on how accusations of conspiracy theory can stifle open inquiry. Questioning certain types of research, especially when a U.S. agency is involved, seems to get dismissed quickly. And that creates a dangerous blind spot.
It's almost like there's this unspoken rule. Don't question whether the U.S. might be involved in research that could have harmful applications.
It's a classic case of don't look behind the curtain, but as Kopp demonstrates, sometimes the most critical information is hidden behind those curtains.
You know, this deep dive is really making me rethink the connections between science, politics, and national security. It's a lot more complex than I ever imagined.
It absolutely is. And as they navigate this complex landscape, Kopp's reporting acts as a guide, helping us develop a more nuanced and informed understanding of the risks and benefits associated with scientific progress.
So where do we go from here? We've uncovered a lot of unsettling information, but it still feels like we have more questions than answers.
That's the very essence of investigative journalism and authentic scientific inquiry. It's not about reaching definitive conclusions. It's about consistently asking the right questions, challenging assumptions, and digging deeper for the truth.
I couldn't agree more. As we continue to explore this topic, we need to remember that the pursuit of knowledge should always be balanced with a strong sense of ethical responsibility.
Absolutely. The possibility of misuse is a shadow that follows scientific advancement, especially in fields with such profound implications for human health and global security. We can't afford to ignore that.
You know, Kopp's reporting also mentioned that the line between gain-of-function research and other types of virology research can get blurred.
Yes, and that's a point worth emphasizing. She explains that even experienced virologists sometimes struggle to pinpoint exactly what constitutes gain-of-function research. There's no universal agreement on a clear definition, which further complicates the issue.
So we got this potentially risky research, unclear definitions, and funding from an agency not typically associated with this type of work. It's a recipe for confusion and, frankly, concern.
You've hit the nail on the head. The lack of clarity and established boundaries raises concerns about whether proper safeguards and oversight are in place. It's a situation that demands more transparency and accountability.
Kopp's reporting also delves into the scientific debate surrounding gain-of-function research itself.
Right. She highlights that there's significant disagreement within the scientific community about whether the potential benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the risks. Some scientists argue that it's a vital tool for understanding and preparing for pandemics. They believe that by studying how viruses can become more transmissible or deadly in a controlled lab setting, we can develop more effective vaccines and treatments.
But as you pointed out earlier, there's also the risk of accidentally creating a more dangerous pathogen. That's a pretty scary thought.
It's a legitimate concern that can't be ignored. Critics of gain-of-function research argue that the risks are simply too high. They point out that even with strict safety protocols in place, accidents can happen. And if a modified virus were to escape from a lab, the consequences could be catastrophic.
It's a real dilemma. On the one hand, we want to be prepared for future pandemics. On the other hand, we don't want to create a bigger problem in the process. What do you think? Are there any alternative approaches to pandemic preparedness that don't involve modified viruses in a lab?
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers are actively exploring. One alternative approach that's gaining traction is focusing on surveillance and early detection of viruses in the wild. By identifying potential threats early on, we might be able to contain outbreaks before they have a chance to spread widely.
That makes sense, but isn't that what USAID's PREDICT program was supposed to be doing?
It was in part, but critics argue that PREDICT focused too narrowly on collecting virus samples and not enough on developing strategies for containment and response. They also point out to the program's reliance on collaborations with labs in other countries, like the Wuhan Institute of Virology, raised concerns about transparency and oversight.
So it sounds like there's no easy solution. We need to be proactive in identifying potential pandemic threats, but we also need to be extremely cautious about the methods we use.
Precisely, and we need to have an open and honest conversation about the risks and benefits of different approaches. Kopp's reporting is a valuable contribution to that conversation.
It definitely is. It's given us a lot to think about. This is really feeling like we've stumbled into a real-life scientific thriller with, global implications,
Yeah.
all this stuff.
And Kopp is really our guide through this maze of information, right? What I find especially insightful is how she emphasizes the blurred lines between different research areas, even for the scientists involved.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't always clear who was funding what which raises serious questions about potential loopholes and lack of, clear oversight.
Exactly. If even the researchers themselves are sometimes unsure about the funding sources and the specific aims of their project, that's a huge red flag. It suggests a system that could be exploited or, at the very least, prone to dangerous misunderstandings.
So what does all this mean for us, the non-scientists trying to make sense of this complex world?
I think it underscores the importance of critical thinking, not taking things at face value, and demanding greater transparency from those in power, especially when it comes to scientific research with such far-reaching consequences.
Kopp's work definitely encourages us to ask those tough questions and be wary of easy answers or attempts to silence legitimate concerns.
Yeah, it's a reminder that scientific progress isn't always a straight line. There are ethical dilemmas, political pressures, and potential for misuse that we need to grapple with.
Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive into some murky waters today. We've explored this controversial link between USAID funding, gain-of-function research, and the potential for bioweapons development. While the intent behind the research is debatable, the lack of transparency and the potential for misuse raise important ethical and security concerns.
Kopp's reporting has given us a really valuable peek behind the curtain, revealing a complex interplay of science, politics, and national security that demands our attention.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with one question for you to ponder. How do we balance the pursuit of scientific knowledge with the responsibility to prevent its harmful applications in a world grappling with pandemics and geopolitical tensions? It's a question with no easy answers, but one that deserves careful consideration as we navigate the increasingly complex landscape of scientific advancement. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.